Okay, the book of Esther, chapter 2. Here we go again with another episode of Papa John's Scripture Notes. The book of Esther, this has been an interesting experience. It's taken a whole new direction. I've looked forward to doing this episode, and it's just taking on a life of its own. Bear with me. I think you're going to enjoy this, but remember, this is the book that does not have the divine name anywhere within it, and it drove the Jewish scribes crazy. They did their best to find ways to, every time they saw the yod, the hey, the vav, and the hey, the four consonants, they would find a way to make those letters in other words, like in different words, not in the divine name, and they would make it larger font size, but I use that term because we're used to that term, but they would make the name stand out on the page because it wasn't there and it drove them crazy. And what do we do in life when we don't feel like God is near? The book of Esther is meant for our day. It's quite remarkable. I've been in touch with Nehemiah Gordon, our Hebrew scholar, and his wife, Linnell, and their crew. They're trying to find some photographs of the name of God the way I've just described. Hopefully, I'll get those by the end of the week so that I can include them in perhaps one of the episodes for the book of Esther. But that being said, we just want to know the Bible as far as it is translated correctly. And we're going to rely heavily upon our Bible scholar, Michael Rood, who is how I met Nehemiah Gordon, was through Michael Rood. And he took us through the last episode, and he's going to take us through this one. Fasten your seatbelts. He's going to go places you've never been mentally, and you've never heard it from the pulpit. But hey, if he's wrong, show me. If what he speaks is not confirmed by the Spirit, tell me why. We're gonna just here we go. So, well, after King Akashverosh, his wrath was appeased, and he remembered Vashti and what he had done. Remember, he's vanquished her because she shamed him. They had a 6-month feast. I can't believe I didn't do the math properly, but that was a 6-month feast in chapter 1. Can you imagine an entire country? Well, let's just say the capital city of Babylon in a 6-month feast and festival. And then they end it with a 7-day feast for the queen and her maidens. And then she disrespects him when she's supposed to walk in as his trophy wife, and she disrespects him. And then now there's been an edict that's gone out that all the women better not disrespect their husbands. It's quite interesting. Well, the time has passed. King Akashverosh was now appeased. He remembered Vashti and what he had done in the decree against her. And Michael Rood says in verse 2, and then the king's servants administered unto him and said, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. Verse 3, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan, the palace, to the house of the women, and to the custody of Haggai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them. So what are we talking about, right? And this is a time, Michael says, when there is a great deal of heartache in the empire because the king is looking for a bride. And so he has men go out and he's looking for the most beautiful women, the most beautiful virgins in all the empire. Now, these are the fairest of all the land. So you know that from a youth, that the parents of other young men have had their eyes on Hadassah and all these other women that are out there. And there are plans that are being made. Wedding plans have already been planned decades in advance. But now we see these young virgins who are taken away from their homes, taken away from the young men who love them, who they are planning to be married to, and there's this hardship throughout the land. There are tears throughout the kingdom. Everyone is upset because they're going to only spend one night with the king, and then they go into the house of the concubines, and they will never see another man in their life. They're going to be kept by eunuchs and by maidens. They're going to have all their needs taken care of, but if the king doesn't want them anymore, that's the last time that they see that he sees them. And so all their hopes and all their dreams for a family just vanished if they are selected. Now we're talking about this and going back into the old Arabic fable that he talked about in the last episode of 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights. So we get a little bit of a picture of what this is like. Um, and yet, these girls aren't going to be executed the next morning like they were in the fiction story, the fable of 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights. But in a sense, their life is over. The average life that you would think for them. So now we see that this is the commandment that has gone throughout the empire. And then it says in verse 4, Michael Rood says, "And let the maiden which pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so." And Michael says, and we pick up where we left off last time. Verse 5, "Now in Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shemi, the son of Kish, a Benjamite." Now this is important, Michael says, to see the genealogies in the Bible and all these names who beget who. The first time these names will mean absolutely nothing to you, but these do mean something because, first of all, we see that it was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shemi, who was the son of Kish. Now, just wait a minute. A Benjamite? This is Kish. This takes us back to 1 Samuel 9, chapter 9, verse 1, where it says, "Now there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Aviel, the son of Zoror, the son of Bechorah, called the son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a man of power." And then in 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2, it continues, "And he had a son whose name was Shaul, a good choice young man and a goodly man. And there was not among the children of Israel a good leader, there was not among the children of Israel a good leader person than he. From his shoulders and upwards, he was higher than all the people." And then Michael Root explains, he could put his arms out horizontally, and everyone in the land could walk underneath his arms. He was that tall. He was that big. Now we see that Mordecai is of this same lineage. He is, it says, the son of Kish. But there's like 480 years, a dozen generations between Kish and Shaul, or King Saul. And finally, Mordecai. But Mordecai was in basically almost royalty. And why I say almost royalty, Michael says, is, well, let's just continue in 1 Samuel. We're going to go to chapter 15 because this is very important to understand for the story of Esther, or Hadassah, her Hebrew name. We need to make sense of this. So in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 1, it reads, Samuel, or Shmuel, so the prophet Shmuel, said unto Saul, Shaul, the king of Yehovah, the king of Yehovah sent me to anoint you to be king over this people, over Israel. I remember doing the episode for 1 Samuel chapter 15, and we went through this. The verse continues, "Now therefore hearken unto the voice of Yehovah." And then verse 2, "Thus saith Yehovah, I remember that which Amalek, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid in wait for him in a way when he was on his when he came out of Egypt." And this is what happened when they were just headed to Mount Sinai and they got attacked by the Amalekites. Verse 3, "Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, in, uh, infant and suckling ox and sheep and camel and ass. Do you remember this story? And then he doesn't kill everybody like he's told to by God. So Michael Rood continues. So now you're asking yourself, why so ruthless, God, right? Well, first of all, when they were coming out of Egypt, it tells us that the Amalekites attacked from the rear, attacked the infirmed, the ones that couldn't keep up, and the women and the children. They were absolute bloodthirsty, merciless cowards. Much of what we see today in the land of Israel today is similar. We see suicide bombers, homicide bombers go into like women's and children's shoe stores and go into like a Passover Seder and go where people are completely unprotected. They don't go and literally do combat with those who are worthy of doing combat. No, they look for the little babies, the women and the children. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the same Amalekites, Michael Rood says. These are the same Amalekites that we named or that were named the Palestinians by the United Nations 50 plus years ago. This is why the Almighty said, get rid of them. As a matter of fact, in Nablus, why is it called Nablus? Because the Arabs can't pronounce the P, the letter P sound. Prior, it was called Neapolis, meaning a new city, the ancient city of Shem. They actually have a display there, which is partially funded by the United Nations. Michael Rood says, he goes, I believe. And this whole display is a museum which shows the Sbarro restaurant, where a bomber went in and blew all these women and children up. And so now they have a museum right there uh, showing these dismembered babies and women that are all torn apart and a few men that are in there with blood and guts splattered all over the place. It's not real, but it's staged to look like what they accomplished in this restaurant at this museum. And they go in there. It's a place of celebration. See, they have a new nomenclature, a new name, a diplomatic designation as the State of Palestine. But, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Rood says these are the same Amalekites. These were renamed the Palestinians by the United Nations, like I said, 50 plus years ago. But you see the same thing going on today. And this is why the Almighty said, get rid of them. Now let's take a look. Let's go a little deeper into this, because Numbers chapter 14, verse 25, it says, now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. What valley is it speaking of? Today we know it as the Great Rift Valley or the Dead Sea Valley. But what was going on among the Canaanites down in that valley? See, to understand why these people had to be taken out by the commandment of the Almighty, and Shaul, was told to do this as king, is because there are some very perverse, sick, twisted people that, as long as they're allowed freedom, they will continue to torture, maim, and kill individuals. And to understand these Amalekites and the Canaanites dwelling there, well, whatever these Canaanites are into, the Amalekites get into as well. And they do it in the Dead Sea Valley. Remember, Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities, Admah and Zaim, these 4 cities were destroyed by fire and brimstone because of the gross sexual perversion that these people were into. Well, where did the Canaanites go back to? All we have to do is take a look back in the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verses 20 to 27, where we read where Noah, after the flood, planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and was drunk. And when he was uncovered in his tent, it doesn't say by whom he was uncovered. And then it says, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, told his 2 brethren without, and Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on their shoulders, went backwards, and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backwards, and they saw not their father's nakedness. Now, why does it say Ham, the father of Canaan? Michael Rood explains. First of all, it says the sons of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Phut, and Canaan. Canaan is a biblical English, Canaan, or in Hebrew, Canaan, in biblical English, was the younger of the sons of Ham. We say Ham, but it's Ham. And so right there, it tells us that Ham was the father of Canaan, was the one that discovered this. And he went in and saw this and went out and told his brothers. His brothers went in and took care of the situation. And when Noah awoke, it says in verse 24 of Genesis chapter 9, when he awoke, he knew what his younger son had done unto him. Whose younger son? Not Noah's younger son, but Ham. Ham. Ham's younger son. Who is Ham's younger son? It's Canaan. So Ham is not Noah's younger son. Shem is the younger or the youngest of the sons of Noah. Japheth is the eldest. But when he saw what Ham's younger son, did unto him, he said, cursed be Canaan. And he cursed him. And we see that the Canaanites take that for which they are, and they are cursed for this to this day. And they take it over to the land which Israel is eventually going to be deeded through Abraham and the Abrahamic covenant. And it's rampant with sexual perversion, with sun god worship that was taken when the Tower of Babel transpired. And this pagan sun god worship is scattered all over the earth. It's the Canaanites, the offspring of Canaan, who with their sexual perverse world take it over to this land, and they're squatting on the land. They were not given this land. They're squatting on the parcel of land through which all the trade routes go right through, right? Where the Almighty has already decided, he has already divided up the nations according to the number of the sons of Israel. He has scattered them at the Tower of Babel, 70 nations, and he's going to choose one nation, the sons of Israel, to be his priests, to be his prophets. And he's going to put them in the trade routes of all the world so that they can be the priests and kings to the entire world, so that they can reconcile the world to God. See, at the Tower of Babel, the Almighty did the world a favor by confusing the languages, but the Babylonian sun god worship was spreading throughout the world then. So this confusion of the languages was doing us a favor. And the sexual perversions of Canaan was then isolated. And the Almighty said, I'll take care of these sexual perverts later. You know, by the time you have a sexual perversion named after your city, such as Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, it's a bad place. You know, this it's like slavery and pedophilia. These are the people that had originated the kidnapping of people and using them as sex slaves. Okay, this is what's going on with these people. And then after they would kidnap them and use them as this type of slave, they would just murder them. And as a matter of fact, that is what our president, Theodore Roosevelt, was dealing with the Barbary pirates. They were kidnapping Americans over there. The Barbary pirates were the Muslim pirates, and they were selling people for sex slaves, and then, of course, trying to get money for their release. And then finally, President Thomas Jefferson and the other governments were paying millions of dollars every year for this very thing to get their citizens released from these pirates. And finally, Teddy Roosevelt said, enough. We're sending the Marines into the shores of Tripoli, and we're going to take care of this. But he said, this isn't the end. We're going to have to deal with them again. And unfortunately, we're dealing with them again. They were in the planes under the World Trade Center when those towers fell. Just all sorts of sick stuff is going on through the sons of Canaan and the Amalekites. So now you understand why in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 3, King Shaul was told to get rid of every last one of these people because they are murderers. They will continue to doing what they've always done. But King Shaul did not finish what God told him to do. And so the story continues right here in the book of Esther, because now we see the background of Mordecai. We see that Mordecai shares the same lineage with King Saul, with King Shaul. That means his cousin, Hadassah, aka Esther, she's almost royalty too. And the almost royalty goes a long way here, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Rood says. We're going to see exactly how that plays out. Now we're going to continue now with verse 6. But Papa John has to just catch my breath. And I hope you're okay. That's some heavy stuff there. And I dare say you've never heard that from the pulpit in Christianity or the LDS Church or at the Catholic Church. This is stuff that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but it's going to be amazing as we now understand the backstory of what is happening behind the scenes right here in the story recorded in the book of Esther. Verse 6, Michael Rood continues, and Mordecai, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jehoniah, the king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther. And then Michael says, now why is she going to be named Esther? Well, we're going to find out about that when we get to verse 10. But here, her Hebrew name is Hadassah. The pagan name that she will be given for good reason is Esther or Easter. It is literally Easter. And remember, we're in Babylon, Shushan, Babylon. So we're going to touch on that in just a minute. And it says that Esther was his uncle's daughter. So that means that Hadassah is Mordecai's cousin. And the verse continues and ends by saying, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, so he took his cousin for his own daughter. So he's raised his cousin as his own daughter because her father was his uncle. Amazing stuff. Verse 8. Michael continues, so it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Hegai, that Hadassah was brought also under the king's house to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. And then Michael adds, this is completely out of her control and out of Mordecai's control. Nobody can do anything about this. Nothing can be done about this. Now she will never have another man in her life, and she's destined now to live forever in the court of the king. Wow. And verse 9, and the maiden pleased him. Now, pleased him. Who's him? Not the king. He pleased, or she pleased Hegai, the keeper of the women. The maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, with such thing as belonged to her, and 7 maidens. So she now has 7 maids. So there's something about this girl, Michael says, that's so special. Her intellect, her beauty, and her standard. The standard by which this woman lived, because she was raised in the house of a Jew. She was raised to respect her cousin, who was taking care of her. She was obedient to him, just as she would have been to her parents. She respected and obeyed Mordecai, and so there was nothing about this. The respect, the intelligence, the absolute knock dead just beauty of this woman, knockout beauty. Everything about her was so absolutely superb that he gave her everything that she needed and 7 maidens, including 7 maidens. And it says, the verse ends by saying, he preferred her and her maids to the best place of the house of the women. So he gave her the very best. Michael continues, verse 10. He says Hadassah. He's not using the word Easter, but I hope that's the same person. Hadassah, or Esther, had not showed her people nor her kindred, because Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. So Michael's going to explain that short verse. Now we need to understand her name and why, when she goes in to meet the king, eventually, why her name is no longer Hadassah. It's Easter. So you've got to give her a good name, and she has to be able to live up to this. Now, who is Easter, first of all? Well, we have we have to go all the way back to ancient Babylon before the confusing of the languages, when Nimrod was worshipped as a god. Well, what happened is that Nimrod was killed. His body was hacked into little pieces, spread throughout the land of Shinar, which should have effectively ended the worship of Nimrod. But no, his wife, Semiramis, not willing to let the kingdom slip from her fingers so easily, said that Nimrod really didn't die. He's ascended up into heaven and has now become the sun god. They're worshiping the sun and Nimrod at the same time. And so Semiramis appointed priests and mathematicians and magicians who would be the ones who would develop the worship of Nimrod as the sun god. This is prior to the Tower of Babel. They are the mathematicians that divided the year into 4 quadrants: winter solstice, summer solstice, the vernal and autumnal equinox, the shortest day of the year, the longest day of the year, the years in the spring and the fall, and the equal daylight and the equal darkness. And so now they put in place the worship of the sun. And December 25th was the winter solstice on the ancient Babylonian calendar before the procession of the equinoxes, which brings us to around December 20th to the 21st today. But December 25th, that's when it all started, the rebirth of the sun. This is when Nimrod was ascended into heaven. In fact, the son of Nimrod, the reborn sun god, Tammuz, is going to be born on December 25th. There's a little bit in the future, or that's a little bit in the future. So now what happens is that Semiramis is in charge of the kingdom. Everything is going well, but she becomes pregnant much later. And now, not in the way you might expect. No, she claims the rays of the sun impregnated her. Her dead husband, Nimrod, now impregnated her by the rays of the sun, and she's going to bring forth her reincarnated sun god, little baby Tammuz, on December 25th. And don't let that be a shock to you out there in the Christian world, Michael Root says, of thinking, oh, I thought that was Jesus's birthday. No, even the Pope knows better, and the Pope hardly knows anything. Oh, Michael, he's living up to his last name for sure, Michael Root. But even the Pope in his latest book said that's nonsense. Okay, so he continues, well, you have to have all the pagan gods, from Zeus to Jupiter to Ra to Tammuz to Mithra, all born on December what? 25th. That's right, because it all goes back to the Babylonian sun worship. Now, what happened next is that Semiramis finally dies, and she ascends up into the heavens. The gods sent her back to the earth, and guess what? She comes back in a giant egg, which plummets into the Euphrates River on the first Sunday after the vernal equinox. The egg burst open, and out emerges Semiramis, reincarnated as Easter, the bare-breasted sex goddess who turns a bird into an egg-laying rabbit. That's why in America they have this Playboy magazine. And what is it? It's the goddess of fertility. It's a sex goddess. What's the symbol? It's a bunny rabbit. It's an egg-laying rabbit. It all goes right straight back to Babylon, ladies and gentlemen, Michael says. Now, what better name for this Jewish girl who's going to be taken into the court of the king than the name that is revered by all the pagan sun god worshippers, Easter. And that's and there's already a feast that's already set up for Easter. And we're going to see that they're going to dedicate that and to have the feast of Easter for Hadassah, who's been renamed at Easter. Well, in a little bit she will be. And so now we go on with verse 11, and we see Mordecai. Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Hadassah did and what should become of her. Now, verse 12. And when every maid's turn was come to go into the king Ahasuerus, after that they had 12 months according to the manner of women, for so were the days of their purification accomplished, to wit, meaning 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. So what's all this about? So Michael's going to help us understand. Now this 12-month program, this is what it takes in the making of the king's bride. Not every woman in the kingdom would trade her hopes and dreams for a family, for friends, for living the way that her parents and grandmothers and grandparents had lived, to leave that community and to be completely separated for the rest of her life. Not that many of them were that excited about it. So you can imagine the state of these milkmaids out there who were selected to be groomed for their one night with the king. In the course of this, we can only imagine what some of these girls wanted to stay or to do to get out of it, to let themselves go a little bit. First of all, we're talking about country girls, okay? They're not wearing high-heeled shoes and prancing around town with the latest jewelry, okay? They are barefoot. Their feet are all calloused and gnarly. Their fingernails are used for sewing and for opening pecans and nuts and everything else. They are working girls. It's a working class world out there. Everyone works, except the Jews, 7 days a week. It's the Jews who take off one day a week, unless you're you are almost royalty, and you live in the capital at Shushan. A lot of these girls were rough, and if they didn't really want that one night with the king, and they really wanted to get married, you can imagine their hair by the time the king's men went around to choose them. They're dressing down. Their hair is probably a rat's nest. They don't want to be attractive when these king's men come looking for beautiful women to have this chance to live with the king. Um, Michael continues, I'm not willing to trade my life for one night with the king. And so now you bring all these girls into the capital and they've got 1 year. And it says 6 months with the oil of myrrh. Well, this isn't something that's particularly pleasant, ladies and gentlemen. Myrrh is the most spoken of oil or fragrance or incense in all of the Bible, even more than frankincense. Myrrh is the most often spoke of. In high doses, it can be toxic. It's a very powerful essential oil. The therapeutic properties are, and it's anti-inflammatory and it's antimicrobial and the antifungal. It's also a sedative. This is what Yeshua was offered: vinegar, spoiled wine, and that's what you get if you don't preserve it correctly. You get vinegar, nasty tasting vinegar with myrrh in it. This is a sedative. This is a painkiller that Yeshua was offered when he was on the cross. When Christ was on the cross, he was offered this type of vinegar. This is not how it's going to be used for these girls, though. It's also an excellent source for gum and mouth disorders, for gingivitis and para and spongy gums and all these other things that people get in real life on their skin. It's used for boils on skin, ulcers, and chapped and cracked skin, even ringworm, weeping wounds, eczema, and athlete's foot, or maybe in this case, milkmaid's foot. Michael's he's so fun. Oh my goodness, the things he says. He continues, and how this is used, this antimicrobial fungicidal, how is it used? Is that it's like for a foot bath. The hands and the body are bathed in this, and then those responsible for getting these young virgins ready, they take a grinding stone, a rough puma, what's that stone? The pumice stone, and they will grind away those calluses. And when they grind away these calluses and this chapped dead skin, and and, and they got this microbial antifungal, because they get, or you can get infections if because of the grinding down, and it can be painful. So they bring it right to the point of bleeding to get rid of all these calluses and these gnarly fingernails and such. And this takes 6 entire months. Yes, and it's painful. And getting ready to be the bride of the king is a painful process. And it's not just getting rid of the physical calluses, it's getting rid of the diction, the language, and the cultural way that they're speaking in the area, because you don't want to bring a hick into the court of the king. If they're going to be the bride of the king, they're going to have to represent the entire empire as Vashti, with the 7-day feast, with the women, and the unlimited credit card account. She could do anything she wanted, and when she threw a party, it was a party. Michael continues, I tell you what, all the rough edges were off of this woman. She was groomed, she was schooled, and we see later that Hadassah is actually going to have a banquet, a 2-day banquet for the king. Do you think she was schooled in what the king's going to want? Do you think she's going to serve him oysters on a half shell if he's keeping kosher law? No, it's everything that you need to know to how to be a queen. And all these rough edges have to be ground away. You've got to know your future husband. This is very important. You have to know your future husband. And if you don't know him, you're going to be in trouble when it all comes down to it. Now, let's continue on with this right here, because after 6 months, the process of myrrh, and that is the grinding away, and that's the trimming down, and that's getting her in a state that's suitable, getting rid of her past. Now she's going to be groomed for the future. Past is behind her. Now she's being groomed for the future. And so, 6 months of sweet odors and other things for the purifying of these women. This is where she's going to be trained in the philosophies of the culture. She's going to be educated in what's going on in the palace. She's going to understand all the protocols. As we see later, that Hadassah knows that if she approaches the king without being called for by the king, she can be executed for that, even as his wife. So these are all the things that these women are going they've got to know, and it's going to take an entire year to be able to learn to do all of that. Then Michael says, now I want to talk about this just for a moment, because there are things that we can equate to being the bride of Messiah. Okay, so now we're going to bring this to a more personal. How can we equate this to our lives and apply it to our lives? As they say, liken the scriptures unto ourselves. So Michael Rood's going from the story of Esther and just talking about, he says, well, let's look in Matthew chapter 10, verse 24. Yeshua speaks of his followers as his disciples, meaning his trained ones. And yet later, Yeshua speaks of his disciples as servants. And then they're spoken of as friends, like in John 15:15. At this time, when King Yeshua said there was a certain king, so when we read about this in the New Testament, that there was a certain king that had made a marriage for his son. Now, some people say because it says a certain king, that means there's really that it's a certain particular king. Like there was a certain man named Lazarus who laid at the feet of the gate of the rich man, and in that parable. And people say, no, it's a real man. There was a certain rich man. Um, but he says, no. Michael Rood says, no, these are just a figure of speech. So in Matthew 22, 1 through 14, a certain king made a wedding for his son, and he sent out people to invite everyone in unto the feast. And this is a beautiful parable. When we get to the New Testament, Papa John's going to spend some time on this parable. There's so much we can learn. And Michael's taking us there right now. And finally, at the end, someone came in, they couldn't get people to come to the wedding. Finally, they bring people in off the street without a wedding garment. This man comes to the feast, and he called them friend, and he sent them out. After they're called a friend, because they didn't have a wedding garment on, he cast them into outer darkness. He bound him hand and foot, and there's going to be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Michael says, to be called and not prepared. Remember, for many are called, but few are chosen. Well, in simple English, few choose to respond. So, as you know, he refers to some of his fellows as friends. But then again, in John 15:5, Yeshua says, no, I'm not going to call you servants any longer. I'm going to call you friends. Uh-oh, that sounds bad. He's calling us friends? The last time I heard the term friend, he was binding us hand and foot and throwing them into utter darkness, because he didn't have a wedding garment on. So Matthew 22:12 through 13 says, see, each one of these is a different picture. We cannot lump all these parables together, because again, in John 15, chapter 15, verses 15 to 17, he says, okay, I'm not going to call you servant anymore. I'm going to call you friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael says, the bride must come. The bride must come with the garments cleaned up, not in the filthy, stinky garments of Babylonian paganism, or as a milkmaid. She's got to be a bride fit for a king. You don't come to the marriage supper of the Lamb just as you are. That's where you start, just as you are. And then it is as long as it takes to get rid of the pagan sun god worship and to get rid of all these things that the scriptures call abominations. This is our responsibility. This is your responsibility. Oh, you'll be given some maids to help you out. Some other people will say, you're off your rocker. That's not going to help much. And you're completely out to lunch. You need to get cleaned up. Quit putting the phallic symbol Christmas tree up in front of your churches. Get rid of the paganism. You've got to get married to the Lamb. You better hate the things he hates. You better love the things he loves. You better get ready, because if you come in without the right garment on, you're going to be bound hand and foot and thrown into utter darkness. And really, I don't think that's what this parable is all about. I think that the parable is saying, don't think you're going to show up in your stinky garments. You ain't getting in, period. And I'll tell you what, Michael continues, there will be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth for the lost opportunities. because the righteous acts of the saints is just that, obedience. Salvation is of grace, yes, but works are of merit. And you don't get into the marriage supper of the Lamb just as you are. Jesus didn't do it all. Yes, he paid the price, the death penalty, and he says, now walk in me, learn of me, understand who I am, do my will, do the Father's will. Get cleaned up. You're going to be a king. You're going to rule as a king if you do what I ask you to do. The righteous acts of the saints, that's what the bride is adorned with. Wow, did you catch that? And a lot of this stuff, if you're like Papa John, the first time I heard him speak this way, the the the, the brain and the firing of the the as your brain connects, the synapses are firing, and the hyperlinks are connecting the dots, and I'm like, how in the world am I supposed to even put this into action? Relax, just listen and learn. And these little thoughts, God will provide ways for us to do better at doing it His way instead of doing it the world's way. Don't be stressed out about any of this. Just allow your mind to be expanded and allow your mind to connect the dots of, I've always wondered why there was Easter bunnies and 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 eggs and the, the history of the Christmas tree and all this stuff. I don't find that anywhere in the Bible. How did that come about? And we try to have the true spirit of Christmas and such. Just allow Michael Rood, who has such an amazing story of conversion, raised a Baptist, went into the military because he wanted to get to know God. And he figured in life and death situations, he would come to know God. And God took him on an incredible journey. I don't have time to go into it today, but he ends up in Israel with his wife for over 15 years, and then she passes away. I think he stayed there another 10 or 15 years. He learned what the Romanized, rebranded Christianity, minus the Judeo roots of, how far Christianity has rebranded and how far Christ has been rebranded. And it's okay because Christ meets us where we're at. But once you learn something, what do you do with truth? Can you handle the truth? And what do you do with the hardest substance in the universe? Truth cannot be destroyed, molded, or changed. Truth is truth. Now back to what Michael Root's talking about here. If you're feeling stressed out by any of this, just relax and learn, and then allow the Spirit to distill upon your heart. And the Spirit will guide us in how we move forward. And we don't have to do everything right. As far as Papa John, I still don't get it all right. I'm still learning. Anyway, Michael Rood says, the righteous acts of the saints, that's what the bride is adorned with. As we compare ourselves to this book of Esther and what she's going through. He continues, and you're not getting into the marriage supper without being adorned with the righteous acts of the saints. In Revelation 21:2, it says, I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. New Jerusalem is not the bride, Michael says. They're saying that the new Jerusalem looks like a bride adorned for her husband. It's going to take us then 7 more verses when an angel comes down in the book of Revelations right here and says, come hither, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. And then it takes 18 more verses right there in the book of Revelations, and it keeps on describing this city, the New Jerusalem. And then finally, the inhabitants of the city who get to dwell with the Lamb. The Lamb's wife now lives with them forever, with him forever in this magnificent, majestic city. There's no way to describe the Lamb's wife except those who have purged themselves from all of the things that are distasteful to the king. The making of the bride's wife. We we or we have to know the bridegroom. Michael Rood says we have to have our garments washed clean and white. The bridegroom says, do not think that I am come to destroy the Torah. And this is in his first recorded public words. Do not think for 1 second I have come to destroy the law. This is in Matthew 5, verses 17 to 20. And in Greek, the word law is nomos. In Hebrew, nomos is the Torah. I did not come to destroy the Torah of the prophets. I didn't come to destroy, but to fulfill. I'm going to tell you, Christ is basically saying that not one jot, not one tittle, which means not one vowel, not one consonant, as it says in the ancient text of the Gospel of Matthew, not one vowel or consonant will pass from the Torah till all is fulfilled. Whoever breaks one of the least commandments in the Torah and teaches men to do so should be called least in the kingdom of heaven, bound hand and foot, if you please. Okay, Michael says, then at the end of this very recitation, he says, not those who call me Lord, not those who call me Lord are going to, not all those who call me Lord are going to enter into the kingdom. That's Matthew 7:21. But those who do the will of my Father. I will profess to many who purport to follow me in that day, the many who called me Lord. I will profess, depart from me, I never knew you, you who work iniquity, you who work anomia. Anomia means nomos, without Torah. You are wild out there. You're lost in lawlessness. I don't know you. Wow. You better get to know the king if you want to spend more than one night with the king, then you better get to know him. Now let's continue on with verse 13. Wow, didn't I warn you? Fasten your seatbelts for this episode. Verse 13. Then thus came every maiden unto the king, whatsoever she desired was given to her, to go with her out of the house of women into the king's house. Verse 14. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned to the second house of the women. Now, Michael's going to explain that verse. Now, she's technically now a concubine. No man will ever touch her. Up to this point, up to this night with the king, but then she could be rejected and sent home, okay? But now, if she's sent to the second house of the women, she's now in the custody of Shah-Ashgaze. Shah-Ashgaze, the king's chamberlain, which means the concubines, she will not come into the king anymore, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. Remember, you can't approach the king, he has to send for you. So the king cannot say, yeah, give me that one, the one, with the chestnut hair from last night. No, he's got to know her name. He's got to use her name. She has to be important, and she has to be known to him by name. Powerful as we compare the imagery of knowing the name of God. And does he know us? Is he in the details of our lives? Does he know what Esther's facing here and Mordecai? We're about to find out in this week's episodes as we try to get through the book of Esther together. And I'm only in the second chapter, my goodness. Verse 15. Now when the turn of Hadassah, the king of Avichayel, which means the mighty, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, when it was time for her to go into the king, she required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all that looked upon her. Verse 16. So Esther, or Easter, was taken into the house of King Ahasuerus, into his house royal, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevat, in the 7th year of his reign. If you know what the month of Tevat is, Michael says, if you don't know what it is, you need to get the astronomical and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar, which he and Nehemiah worked on together along with other scholars that were pretty much rooted in the Eastern mindset of Christianity, not the Christianity that developed and the rebranding of Western Christianity. And if that doesn't make sense to you, just know it's a real thing. They are not so bound to all the rules and regulations that evolved with the creeds and the councils since Constantine, that kind of rebranded Christianity into a more of a Roman Western mindset, away from all things Hebrew and Jewish. So Easter was taken into the house of King Ahasuerus, into his house royal in the 10th month. Now, if you know what the 10th month Tevat is, if you don't know, like he says, you got to get to know his calendar, because until you get your mind out of the pagan calendar that we inherited from Rome, in which every day of the week is named after a pagan god, I didn't know that. Did you know that? And every month of the year named after a different pagan god? Really? Okay. Until you step back into the biblical reckoning of time, things like this, they're just going to go right past you. But it's the seventh year now, and she's been called in after a year of probation, a year of preparation. Verse 17, and the king loved Hadassah above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Wow. Now, verse 18. Then the king made a great feast, and all his princes and servants, the, the feast of Easter. So, Michael Rood says, now what is the feast of Easter? Well, again, fasten your seatbelts. Papa John's just warning you. First of all, Michael says we have to step back because Semiramis, her child, Tammuz, little baby Tammuz, which we read about in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 8, verses 12 through 18, we read about the women at the temple in Jerusalem, weeping for Tammuz there. Verse 14 reads, then he brought me to the door. And I can't go into it, but this is powerful scripture where he's in a vision and he's being given a tour. So the angel takes him to the door, verse 14. Then he brought me to the door of the gate of Jehovah's house, which was towards the north, and behold, there sat a woman weeping for Tammuz. And Papa John put companion verse, Doctrine and Covenants 29, verse 21. Check it out, especially for any of those my family members and friends who are of the Latter-day Saint Church, the Church of Jesus Christ, the restored gospel. We accept the Doctrine and Covenants for those that don't understand what that book is. In the restored gospel, we believe in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Book of Mormon, and the Doctrine and Covenants, which is referenced here as D&C, the Doctrine and Covenants, and one more book called The Pearl of Great Price. We don't believe that the Bible's closed and that God doesn't speak. We believe every age and people and every culture has records that we should consider as perhaps reliable about how God interacted with them, unlike the Western Christian mind, okay? And we're careful not to. Anyway, let's continue with the story today. Well, the little baby Tammuz, who should have lived forever since he was a reincarnated sun god, right? But not so. On his 40th year, or in his 40th year, he was gored to death by a wild boar in a freak hunting accident. So the worshippers of the reborn sun god, they now set aside 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, in which the sun god worshippers would deny themselves of pleasure in this life for the pleasure of Tammuz in his afterlife. And it started out with a big sex orgy, and then they denied themselves of pleasure. And then at the end of this holiday, the feast of Easter, later when his mother was reincarnated as Easter, the bare-breasted sex goddess on Easter Sunday, they would roast the pig that had gored symbolically, that had gored Tammuz, and eat ham on Easter Sunday. That's the feast of Easter. So they had a big celebration. It was the Easter celebration. Oh, yes, they. Who's they? The Canaanites. First of all, they would impregnate the virgins on the altar of Easter on Easter Sunday. 9 months later, these little children were now born. So 9 months later, we have 3-month-old children, and these 3-month-old babies are now sacrificed on the altars of Easter. They dyed the eggs. They dyed the eggs with the blood of the sacrificed infants. And now we still keep dyeing eggs, and we do it at our churches, which is nothing but a memorial to child sacrifice. The Almighty said, do not learn the way of the heathen. That's in Deuteronomy, 2 Kings, Jeremiah, and Psalms. Do not learn the way of the heathen. Do not worship the way they worship and serve their gods, for they have even burned their children in the fire to other gods. Oh, I tell you, Michael Rood says, wow. So now you know about the Feast of Easter and what's going on. And in the remainder of the verse 18, King Ahasuerus says he made a release to the provisions and gave gifts according to the state of the king. Verse 19, and when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Then Michael's going to explain. So this is another role of the young virgins that are being brought in for this. But you know the position of the queen. Sorry, it's already been filled. So now you've got to fit into the concubine mode. I guess the king really liked this concept of getting all the beautiful young virgins in the entire empire, and then he would have his pick. And so when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai sat in the king's gate. So that's what's going on. That's the background for context of what we're going to read about next. Verse 20, Esther had not yet shown her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Hadassah did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. So she has not revealed her Hebrew roots, her Jewish roots. So verse 21, and in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, Michael says, listen to this. Listen to what happened. See, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to see that even though the name of the Almighty is not found anywhere within the pages of the book of Esther, we are going to see him working behind the scenes. We are going to see him weave the entire fabric of life together. And this is where we are in this day, in our time, our day and time. We do not see everything he's doing, but we see even those who are elected into positions of responsibility in the government, in the United States and in Israel. All of these things are done, and the Almighty today is weaving his plan together. 4,000 years ago, the creator of the heavens and the earth made an everlasting covenant with Abraham. All the land from the Euphrates to the Nile belongs to the sons of Israel. And I will tell you, Michael says, shock waves are going to shake the earth as heaven reaches down to fulfill that promise. And every nation that stands against that promise, against that eternal covenant, will find themselves on the battlefield against the Almighty. That is why Jerusalem will be considered as a burdensome stone for all the nations. Boy, isn't that the truth today, right? Because this is what is coming up right now in our day, in our age. And so listen to this, Michael says, in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, and those who kept the doors, they were angry, and they sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. Okay, so he's hearing a plot to kill the king. Verse 22, and the thing was known to Mordecai, and he who told it unto Esther, the queen, and Esther then certified the king in Mordecai's name, meaning she explained, Mordecai came and told me about this plot. And verse 23, and when I can't say the word, the inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings. See, even the Babylonians do what is seldom done, Michael says, in the Christianity and with the messianic believers of the world today. Diligent inquiry was made. See, in Deuteronomy 19:18, it tells us about this very thing. When someone brings an accusation against someone, then at that point, both parties are brought before the judges, and they make a diligent inquiry. And if the person has made a false statement against the other, that which would have happened to the innocent party would then come upon the one making the false accusation. Unfortunately, no one, and especially as I've witnessed it in the Messianic world, even bothers to read the Torah about this. I hear these leaders all over, they repeat lies over and over, destroying people's lives, and they think that they're some big Torah teacher, and they try to convince people that they're a big Torah teacher. But here in the book of Esther, that diligent inquiry is made, and then they hanged them because they would have caused the death of the king. But now death is coming upon them. And then Michael Rood says, I got to wrap this up. So join us next time as we find out who the arch enemy of Mordecai is and how he got put into this position of power. How? Well, because the Almighty is weaving together all the history in order to effect his plans. And we can apply that to our day. I promise you, Papa John promises you, God is in the details of our lives. He knows what we're facing. We don't have to despair. He has already planned for our return. Even as he put them into exile in Babylon for 70 years, he had planned for their escape, which we've been studying about recently. And I've just got to wrap this up. Don't be stressed. Don't change everything overnight. Allow the Spirit to help you determine what to focus on. I'm aware of the Sabbath being on Saturday as far as I can tell. I'm open to the possibility of being wrong, but the more I study and learn, I realize the Sabbath was not changed by God, but by Rome. And it was done for a political reason. Under the penalty of death, when you read the edict, if you kept the Sabbath on Saturday like the Jews and kept the feasts and festivals under penalty of death, you would be executed. Sounds to me like it wasn't very inspired. But what has that knowledge given me? In many ways, I now break the Sabbath twice a week. I break it on Saturday because I have to work here at the ranch on Saturdays. And sometimes I break it on Sunday with the Christian Sabbath. But I'm aware. And when the sun sets on Friday nights, I'm aware of the Sabbath. And just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, just like Hananiah, Michael, and Azariah in Babylon could stay true to the true and living God to the best of their ability, that's my goal. And I want my children and my children's children, my future posterity, my extended family and friends today just to be aware of how much Christianity has been rebranded. I'm often accused in the LDS church by my evangelical friends that we renamed or we worship a different Jesus Christ. And I'm like, well, who do you think we learned that from, if it's true at all? Christ was rebranded long before we came along and had our chance. We've inherited much that needs to be corrected, but that's okay. God will meet us where we're at. And then if we will honor the revelations that he continues to place upon our heart, and we find delight in doing just a little bit here and there, we will improve and we will become closer to the type of believer that Esther spent a year in her preparatory year so that she would know how to be the queen because she knew the king. And we are promised the same through Christ. As joint heirs with Christ, we will become priests and priestesses, kings and queens to the Almighty. And thankfully, we have the 1,000 years of the millennium prior to being ushered back into the presence of the Father, where Christ himself will help us all shed the lies we've inherited from our fathers. I hope you feel the Spirit backing up what we've talked about today. A lot of this was quite heavy, but we can't continue to play church as little children. We need to grow like a child, from milk to bread to meat, in a way that God sees us growing up unto him. And then we walk with him daily despite the wicked world around us. I love each of you. Thanks for joining me for this episode, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon.